Hello, welcome to Dwarf-craft. In this video I'll make a very quick wall terrain for tabletop gaming. So one day when I was cutting XPS-foam, I tried using a saw and discovered these instant stone textures by accident. Before making any terrain out of this, I tried a few ways of cutting to get the best textures. It turns out that the foam likes cuts in one way better than the other. When I cut again in a different direction, the textures get worse. You can see these flimsy half-attached pieces here. They will do no good for our terrain. So we begin the craft by choosing this side. I began by cutting out a long piece that will probably be enough for this build. What am I building? At this point I had two options: strange dwarven walls or post-apocalyptic reinforced walls. Tough choice. Well, while cutting I held the saw vertically to get nice, somewhat consistent textures. Good, this cutout was straight enough. Next, the loose foam junk was easily removed. I simply moved about with my finger to clean the surface. Nice, there we have it, the instant stone textures. I then tried cutting the top surface to get textures there as well, but that didn't work at all. Something about the structure of the XPS-foam makes it easier to cut in certain angles. Okay, now I knew what I was gonna do as I heard Dwarven chanting in the distance. The untextured top surface will be covered in metal constructions. Yeah, I began cutting the bits I need for my terrain. I sawed a few roughly 12 cm bits, some 5 cm-ish bits, and then I planned how I will lay this out on bases. 3 pieces of terrain should be enough. I already have limited space. Before basing I cut out the glossy factory surface of my bits. In this way glue sticks better to the surface. Great, then I drew the rough shapes of my bases on a piece of hardboard. On the bases I left some room for little bits, such as this dwarven head. I sawed out the bases and then slightly beveled the edges of the hardboard. When beveled, terrain will better merge into whatever game table or battle mat you have. Okay, I believe my wall layouts have changed between every frame here, but that's no problem. I glue on the bits using PVA glue. Here I made sure to make spaces large enough for miniatures to move in between without problem. I think I glued these bits wrong. Well, I don't care, that looks good. Great, I imagine these terrain bits can be used to create a wall like this. Next step is to throw on sand on the ground of the terrain. Well, not like that. Really, I gathered sand of suitable grit, then sterilized it in the oven. This sand I then glued onto the base. I like using plenty of glue to make sure that the sand stays in place without the use of any further sealing. Okay, this dwarf statue head is from a set of giants. I glued it together first, then attached it to the terrain in the most sophisticated way. Here I'm making what's called a glue and sand pile. This pile is excellent for attaching the head. I was able to push the gluey dwarf head so that it appears to be partially submerged into the soil. Very good. All of this glue takes much time to dry, but not if we place these in sunlight. Okay, now the sacred oats are back on the crafting table. Well, the cardstock package at least. I'll use this material for the top of the wall. I began by cutting roughly wall-wide strips using my utility blade. Then I checked the fit on the walls. They look good. The pieces should all be slightly overlapping on all sides. I was happy with my idea, so I glued the cardstock pieces on. On this larger wall, the cardstock goes over the gap here. Now we have what can be called a gate. Of course, this terrain will go well together with other dwarf terrain I've built. Therefore, I glued on additional cardstock details. By the way, here is the epic dwarf terrain playlist. Anyway, for the details I cut a slightly thinner strip of cardboard that I shaped like this. I also cut a few different bits, all of dwarf approved shape, as usual. An idea for you: for higher quality terrain you could make the top parts from thicker board. Now it was getting rather late, but I still wanted a few simple platforms for my dwarves to stand on. My solution was simple. I cut out a piece of the hardboard we used for the bases earlier. Then, using barbecue sticks, I glued in the platforms. Poke the stick into the foam, then put on the platform. Easy, and looks great. Next I cut cardstock strips and glued them on the side of the platforms. I let the pieces overlap quite a bit so that sand can be nicely poured onto the surface later. These were unnecessarily tricky to get in place using PVA glue, so I recommend super glue or hot glue if you decide to make something similar. Yeah, and then I applied plenty of glue again and applied sand on the platform. The surface will look similar to the ground. You may ask, why would there be so much sand and stones up on these platforms? Good question. Dwarves have very heavy boots that get sand stuck in them. Also, dwarves feel safer when sitting on crude rocks. Indeed, I let all of this dry overnight. Next morning I checked the terrain. Good, no loose pieces and tiny amounts of warping, no problem. I proceeded by priming with a matte black and met a rather unfriendly fellow. I was able to cover 2 of these before running out of spray. What a shame. I painted the rest by hand. I took my crappy paints and started mixing. For painting the ground I mixed a medium brown. I thinned the paint with some water and applied it over the entire base. The platforms are also painted with the same brown. Alright, next I mixed a grey and overbrushed the ground. Yeah, the stones do look a bit too large for miniature scale. The next time I'll use finer sand. After working with the medium grey, I also touched some areas with a lighter grey. I continued by painting the walls using the same paint. First a rough brushing with dark grey. Then we move to medium grey and light grey. I do all of this painting without waiting for the paint to dry. In this way I can blend the colors a bit while I save time. After waiting for the paint to dry, I dry brushed with a white. Here we can start seeing and judging the instant stone textures. What do you think? I then hit the edges with a bit more paint on the brush. Okay, starting to look like something. Next I painted the top parts with copper. Just sloppily dry brushing will do. The sides of the platforms and the dwarven head is also painted copper. Afterwards I painted another layer with more paint on the brush, streaking over some parts to make the surface uneven. Then I dry brushed gently with gold. This is mainly for highlighting the edges of the cardstock details. The head, on the other hand, I brush with plenty of gold paint. Now we move to my favorite, oil paints as washes. I took some brown oil paint and thinned it down with some white spirit. I apply this gently on about everything. Most importantly on the low to mid sections of the wall. And then I smudge it around. I also apply it on the ground and on the metal surfaces. To help even out the wash, I also worked it with a piece of toilet paper. What I have noticed when washing and weathering with oil paints is that I don't have to care much about painting the base layers. As long as the paint job looks okay, the oil paints will fix the rest. That's why I have painted the walls in boring black and grey. I knew these oil paints would add the needed color. Next I worked with a dark green oil wash. This I applied a bit more sparingly. Well, not quite. I applied it on less surface area, but where I applied it, I let it flow down along the walls. With this I also washed the dwarf head, which now looked very nice. Alright, I made sure to clean my brush before calling this done. As you travel further into the mountain, you come across the outer rims of the sleeping Stonekin city. You've fought your way through lesser devils and foul undead to get here, and now you sense something worse. Another abomination of the corpse guard stands before you, and animated dead start appearing from the mist. What do you do? What you can do is subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the video. What do you think? Did the instant stone textures work? Let me know. Now go ahead and watch one of these videos next, and consider joining the path of tabletop crafting on Patreon if you wish to support my work. Goodbye, good day, thank you.